So stabilization, what are you using to stabilize your images if you are using a lower ISO where, or I'm sorry, a lower shutter speed where you're going to have difficulty in holding it still. And so a good rule of thumb I hear people talk about a lot of times is that you'll want to use a shutter speed that matches at least what your focal length is. So if you're shooting, let's say, like a 10mm wide lens, you might be able to get away with 1/10 of a second because the apparent motion, if you were to shake a little bit, it's going to seem like it's less. But if you're using, let's say, a 400mm lens, your view is so cropped in and so narrow that it's going to appear like you're shaking it more. So in that case, a 400th of a second might be a better rule of thumb to not go below. But if you're going to be stabilizing it and not hand holding it, then you have a couple of options. And just really quickly, I want to show the difference between a couple of tripods here. And I also have a monopod. So monopods are handy when you don't really need it to be perfectly still and let it sit and do long exposures, just more to stabilize a little bit. The nice thing about the monopods is that they're really easy to pack and take with you on your backpack. And there's some places where you might be going where, maybe not in nature photography so much, but where you might not be allowed to take tripods. I've heard people say the rules of location are that as soon as you have a tripod touching the ground, you're professional, and then you have to get releases and you have to jump through a lot of hoops. But you could have a point-and-shoot camera on a tripod and you would have to do all that, whereas a professional could come in with a monopod or just handheld with $10,000 worth of gear, and they would not have any trouble. So, so this is good in those kind of situations. If you're shooting shots like I was mentioning, where you'd want to do, let's say, like a panoramic, where you're going to be stitching together your photos, a tripod with what they call a three-way head is handy for that, because even though it might take you longer to make all of your adjustments individually, once you lock in the height and the tilt of your image, then you can just loosen the panning, and you can sweep your axis without having to worry about having to readjust and having the images not really line up well. Whereas if you have something like a ball head tripod, these are really convenient because you can really quickly set them up. Here, I'll just drop this down so I can show you real quickly here. With one lever, you can loosen it and you can position it however you want, and then just one lever, you lock it, it stays in place, and they're pretty quick and pretty solid. But again, if I was going to take a photo this way and then shoot a sequence, I'd have to loosen up and kind of guess where I'm going to end up, and it's a little bit more difficult to get predictable results that way.
How many dollars are you holding in your hand?
I think this was not actually a set that was, I think it was, this head came on a set of legs more like this, which is, I think this is a little bit bigger, yeah. But I think it was around $200, as I recall, for this Manfrotto ball head and a decent set of legs. This one I think was a little less. I got this one probably 6 years ago, so the price might be a little bit different now.
Are they glass or are they?
They're steel. I think they're steel. They're either steel or aluminum. They might be aluminum. But yeah, these it does get more expensive if you use lighter weight. I should say lighter weight, higher quality. If you use like carbon fiber legs, are much more expensive. I've heard some people say that if you think you're going to get into the photography, don't go and get a really cheap lightweight tripod, because what you're going to quickly realize is that it holds the camera kind of still, but not really still, and then it's going to end up shaking and you're going to be disappointed, and then you're going to want to go out and spend the additional money that you would have had to spend, and you'll have two tripods, but the first one's really not worth a whole lot. But at the same time, I've heard people say, don't go out and get a $500 or $1,000 tripod, because you don't want to have to worry about, well, I'm going to go and stick it in the mud, and I'm going to get grit up inside these tubes, and you're going to end up having scratches, and it's going to end up getting all gummed up. So, depending on your I guess your budget and your thoughts, you can kind of think either way. But another quick thing I can show you about these two, these are really the same type of legs, but what I've done here is taken the center column and flipped it around. And so you can mount the head on just this piece and then take this whole, you can see it's a little bit loose here because this actually will disconnect. And so you can take this center column out. So what this will let you do is, this is about as low as you can get if you've got it set like this. But if you've got the center column taken out, then you can spread these out a lot further to the point where you're almost sitting on the ground. And then you can get extremely low shots. So, and I'll show some examples in a minute, some photos where When you're trying to basically add depth to a photo, you want to show foreground elements, and including the foreground that's right in front of you is a nice way to be able to kind of add that depth. And you know, when you're seeing it three-dimensionally and then you reproduce it two-dimensionally, you need to add visual keys to kind of give that depth of, you know, that feeling of depth in there. So okay, so that's, I'll bring out some other toys in a minute. I'll show you. Oh, I guess I can leave the lights on for this next part. Just really quickly, using your own body. So if you don't have a tripod or something, a lot of people I've seen when they're holding their camera, the way they'll hold the camera is out in front of them like this. And I think a lot of that comes from they're looking at the screen on the back because that's a convenient way to do it. But if you think about it, you've got so much motion that's going to go in there. The first thing you really want to do is you want to get your hand under the lens and, you know, stabilize it like this and get your arms into your body. Typically, I don't recommend using the viewfinder to frame up your shots. It's just so much sharper. You can tell your focus and everything so much better through the viewfinder. And so it's gonna, and you're not gonna have issues of daylight, you know, light getting on the back of your screen as much as well and making it difficult to see. But, you know, you want to kind of lock your arms into your body. And what that'll do is that'll tighten everything up and it lets you get away with these longer exposures that you don't need to have a tripod as quickly. But one of the things I've seen, I think it was, what's his name? I'm going to give him credit if I can think of his name. Joe McNally, who's a photographer, he's a well-known photographer. He has shown this method where he uses his own body as a tripod, sort of, where he uses the bone in his shoulder, which, as he describes it, doesn't have a lot of fat or anything on top of your shoulder bone. So if you are left eye dominant, or at least you can get away with using your left eye, you kind of hold the camera this way and you pull it on your shoulder, and then you can hold it pretty still because there's not a whole lot, I mean, as long as you keep your legs still, there's not a whole lot of squish to your body that way, and you can get away with a longer exposure that way. But there's a lot of other little techniques and things people use, but those are some of the ones that I've found to be, that produce good results. So when you're doing these long exposures, rather than having it on the tripod, and then again you press that button and the camera shifts that tiny little bit, you know, even if it's a good tripod, by the time you get the weight of the camera and everything on there, you will see that it does have just a tiny bit of give to it. So you can use the built-in timer if you're going to be doing where you're going to run in and get with your family in the shot. You can set it as low as 2 seconds with a lot of cameras. So with a 2-second timer, you basically hit the button, and then in the course of that 2 seconds, it happens almost instantly, but within that 2 seconds, everything kind of stops moving and it sits still, and then it opens the shutter and closes it, and nothing is really moved in your camera other than the mirror flipping up and down, which if you're using an extremely long lens, like a telescope or something like that, you will see some vibration. There's some tricks you can get around with that, but for most people that does the trick pretty well. But you can also get a trigger release, which plugs in, depending on the camera, plugs into the body, or on the, sometimes they're wireless depending on the body as well. And what that'll let you do is, you can, for the ones where you can lock it down, it's like a little 3-foot or so cord, and you can hit the button, which begins the exposure, and then slide it, which will lock it in place, and then you basically just let it sit on the ground or hang on the tripod, and it just takes an indefinite picture. Do keep in mind, though, that if you're using long exposure with digital cameras, it does eat up a lot of batteries, a lot more than the 35mm cameras seem to. I'm not really sure exactly why. It's something to do with the way it's actively capturing the data with the sensor. But if you're using the noise reduction, a lot of people use the low light noise reduction, where what it essentially does is if you take, let's say, a 10-second photo after a certain shutter speed, and I'm just going to say 10 seconds, I'm not sure exactly where it is, it might be a little less than that, but if you were to take a 10-second photo after your photo is taken with the mirror still folded down and not actually exposing anything anymore, it'll expose a second 10-second exposure of nothing, but it'll generate the same level of noise because depending on how warm the sensor is and the settings and everything, there will still be some noise generated. So it compares the actual photo to the photo of just the noise, and then it tries to subtract the noise out. But if you're doing, let's say, like a 5-minute shot, then you shot for 5 minutes, and then you have to sit around and wait for 5 minutes before you can actually do anything with the camera again, because it's just going to say, you know, doing noise reduction on the, there's a little NR kind of a thing that's blinking on the display. So depending on how effective that is and how much time you have to wait around, you may or may not want to do that. If you're shooting it at a really low ISO anyway, on a tripod, you can get away with shooting at your lowest ISO setting, which is probably what you want to do for dark. If you don't have moving subjects, then you don't always need to do that. It depends on the model of the camera, I guess, too, but that's a good, good rule of thumb. When I'm shooting in the dark, most of the time I'm using still a really low ISO. Let me kill these lights again. So this is a shot in the slot canyons. I actually set the camera up and I went over and stood in the shot. And because it was such a long exposure, I'm leaning against the rocks so I wouldn't be shifting back and forth and looking like a blurring ghost or something like that. But here's an example of some creative stuff with my friends and I were camping at Aztec Island, and we were messing around with these long exposures. And so what I did was I set the camera with a strobe of Speedlights sitting on top to 30 seconds, and I set the flash to rear curtain, which basically means that the flash actually fires off at the end of the exposure rather than the beginning of the exposure. So what ends up happening is we've got this 30-second window where you hit the button and you run out there and you do whatever you're going to do, and then at the end of 30 seconds it pops the flash and closes the shutter. So what we were doing is we were fooling around with glow sticks and flashlights and things, and we would go out there and paint with light and draw pictures and stuff, and then we would be kind of counting to estimate when it was going to flash at the end. And then, you know, in this case I'm jumping rope with these two glowing people or whatever, and I'm standing there like I'm getting ready to jump over the rope. So that was kind of my little joke. But this is a photo from the Multimedia Production Center's filmmaking and photography boot camp. So this is Wayne McGuire, who's the Tai Chi instructor there. He came to help us out with this workshop where I made this staff, which is basically a piece of metal conduit for electrical conduit with LED lights taped on the ends. And he's basically just spinning it to produce the circles you're seeing. And then he held it still. And while he was spinning it, I was positioning myself around behind him, and then I popped the flash manually. I just took the flash in my hand and then just went and hit the the trigger button. So you can manually trigger these. It doesn't have to be synced with the camera if the camera's open for an extremely long period of time. In fact, you could do multiple flashes. Some of the other things we were doing that day, we were doing some interesting things with the lights, like flashlights and things. But we would pop a couple of lights on our people to basically kind of establish the shot. So you'd have, rather than they're constantly a little bit moving and a little bit blurry, you'd get that one quick pop that kind of freezes the action, and then they can do whatever they want to do, and all the lights would kind of smear around, and it kind of helps to solidify the picture a little bit that way. So here's a quick example of using whatever's available kind of a thing. Shooting in the DC Metro. Again, this is one of those places where I'm guessing if you brought in a tripod, you might leave in a police car. So, or at least if you didn't, go through the proper channels. So, I just happened to have my camera with me. So, as the train was leaving, I just kind of leaned on the railing and took a photo. And you can see that I was trying to get a little bit longer exposure because it was relatively dark in there. And you can see the motion of the car, the blur of it. And if that was handheld, that would have probably been blurry. I probably wouldn't have been able to handhold that. One of the things I want to talk to you guys a little bit about today is using filters, and a couple of the two that I find the most common to be using is polarizing filters, which reduce glare, and neutral density filters, which I like to kind of equate to sunglasses for your camera. They're not really supposed to do anything other than cut back the light, and they do actually tint it a little bit if they get to be a little bit darker, but you can correct for that in camera. You can change your color, your white balance to correct for that. And then there's a type of filter called a variable neutral density filter, which is actually designed with two polarizing filters, and as you rotate them, as they kind of go 90 degrees to each other, they actually will block out quite a bit of light. And as you rotate those polarizing filters in line with each other, it looks almost just like a slightly darker polarizing filter. So, and the reason you would use these is because if you want to be able to shoot with longer exposures and more wide open apertures, but you can't because it's too bright, you need to be able to cut the light back. And you could just, let's say for example, shoot with a faster shutter speed. But if you want to convey motion, or you want to have motion blur or whatever it might be, or let's say you want to have a shallow depth of field, and by closing down your iris to a really small aperture, you're all of a sudden getting this deep depth of field. So this is again a way that you can kind of cut back the light getting into your camera. And then the polarizing filter, of course, to cut back on glare. So here's an example. This is in Page, Arizona. This is actually right near the slot canyons. This is they call the Horseshoe Bend, where you can see the photo itself was a little bit challenging this day. We went actually 2 days. This is the second day. And the sun being a little bit brighter, a little bit more direct, you've got a lot of shadowing, and you've also got the reflections off the water. So same camera, same settings and everything. I just took the polarizing filter and I spun it, and that's basically what it does. So you can see where now, because the reflections are going off the water, the camera doesn't need to include that as the brightest values. And so it can give me a more manageable contrast range. And so again, I don't think I go into this too much later, so I'll mention a little bit more now. Keeping in mind that what you can see with your eyes is a much, much greater contrast range than what you could get with film, which is greater than what you can get with digital. Digital cameras are getting better and better, and I will go into some ways that you can kind of trick it by using high dynamic range and combining a sequence of photos to pull in more contrast range and basically compress the contrast range a little bit. But you can see where this is like a nice way to do it in camera quickly, and you can look on the back of your camera and know that you've gotten exposure at least relatively close. The back of the camera is not going to tell you like a really true representation of what you got. I mean, at least it'll tell you close though. So as far as lighting considerations, I'm not going to get into lighting too much, but I just want to mention some terms here so that way you guys are familiar with them, and to talk a little bit about some of the different kinds of light. So your available light is whatever is available around you. It's usually thought of natural light, but some people jokingly say that if I have a flash available, that's available light. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the sun, reflections in this room off of the screen, coming into the windows. That's all the available light. You can use something like a reflector, which basically takes that available light and will bounce it. So this is what they call like a 5-in-1 reflector. It's silver on one side, black on this side. If I unzip this cover, it'll be gold on one side and white on the other. And if I take the cover off completely, the middle panel is the light is semi-transparent, so you can't really see through it, but the light can kind of light up the panel. So let's say I was taking a photo of Eric. Somebody could basically hold this up and block that noonday direct sunlight. And now instead of having this little pinpoint of light from the sun and far off in the distance, making these harsh shadows, I could basically have this be a nice wide light source that's now going to more evenly light him, and it's a little bit more flattering. Plus, you don't have people squinting if the light's directly in their eyes. You can cut it back with something like this. Keep in mind, though, that if your background is still really light, what's going to end up happening is that it's going to have to include in your range of light values a bright background with a now darker foreground. So you might want to shoot against, let's say, like a tree background or something that's not going to be a bright sky, because your sky is going to be completely blown out when you do something like that, unless you bring in a little bit extra light in the foreground. On-camera flash, which is something that I don't really recommend people use unless you kind of have to, and I'll show an example in a minute where it does come in useful. But the problem with the on-camera flash is that it doesn't have any versatility to it. It's either popped up and flashing or it's not. And you can't really bounce it anywhere. You really can't do anything other than blast light right in people's faces. And it's not even that powerful really to begin with. So if you get something like a Speedlight, so this would clip on top of the camera just as it is. I'll show you about this cable in just a minute, but you can be direct if you're out in the open where you have nothing to bounce off of, or you can bounce off the ceiling. You can use reflector, or do I bring a, don't think I brought a, diffusers and different things that will kind of soften the light a little bit and broaden the light source. In this case, you can gel it, and I'll talk more about gels in a minute and what this is actually doing, but this is a little holder that you can slip these color gels into, and you can color the light, and then I'll talk a little bit why you might want to do that. But you can do it this way, or if you have, this is a specific thing to this Nikon SP900 flash, but you can get these little sample packs of the Roscoe filters. I think it's like usually like $2 or $3 for this whole pack of all the different ones. They basically want to get it in your hands so you can sample them, but it just so happens that they're the great size that you can tape them on the front of your flash. And even if it doesn't completely color perfectly, it colors it enough, a little light might spill around it, it's still going to give you a good way to color. And you can have tons of options. You can have, this is what they would call a CTO or an amber. Or CTO basically stands for change to orange, or you can get these in like the full value or like a half, or different shades of this. You can get CTB, which is change to blue, or a couple different colors that are known for changing the color temperature of daylight. And then you can also use all kinds of different, just whatever colors, there's all kinds of colors in these little packs to get creative with lighting up the foreground or the background, whatever it might be. But not only can you do that, you can then take your light and you can bounce it off a wall. So now if I'm bouncing off this screen and I'm taking a portrait, even if it's outdoors, you still, and it's, let's say you're backlit by a bright space, I could fill the light in, or I could light it off of this wall, and now this whole wall becomes one big light source, and so it's a nice big soft light source because this whole wall is being lit. It's a lot bigger than the small head of the flash here. So if you use something like this cord, now this gives you the ability to take the flash and move it around, and so now you can shape your light a little bit more that way as well. You can also use it to control other flashes, which I'm not going to get into too much today, but that's one of the nice things about the Speedlights is they can, some of them at least, can control other lights. So you can have multiple flashes going off simultaneously. So you can have one that's a backlight that's set at different settings, different power, whatever it might be. One that's, you know, your main, your key light, whatever. I'm not going to get into that too much, but studio strobes are what you typically see in a studio. But if you use something like this, you can bring them out outdoors or wherever you want to go. And basically what this is it's a big lead acid battery and an inverter in a bag. And so I can get 300 watts worth of power. And surprisingly, this will fire off a studio strobe hundreds of times before it runs down. It's really pretty decent. So that's great because you have the flexibility to bring bigger lights out. If you're shooting like macro photography, let's say in like a garden or someplace where you're a little bit more controlled environment, and I was mentioning how you want to be able to use a smaller aperture setting, a smaller iris, because it gives you that deeper depth of field. If you can bring in a nice big softbox and light up your area that you're shooting, now all of a sudden, not only do you not have to worry about is it a bright sunny day and it's a harsh light, you can bring in a more flattering, pleasing light, or let's say like that, but you can also blast in a lot more of it and then close down your aperture because of that and get a little bit deeper depth of field. So there's some things you can do with studio lights in the field if you've got them. They're not just for indoors. And again, I'm not going to go into this too much, but quickly the difference between the TTL and non-TTL lighting. TTL basically stands for through the lens. Bugs landing on me. Through the lens, basically that means that as you're taking a picture, it looks through the lens at what's being evaluated through the lens itself. And the moment before you take your photo, it meters it then, and the flash output adjusts accordingly. A non-TTL, or like I like to call it kind of like a more of a dumb flash, you just set the power and it fires off and it doesn't take into account anything. So the advantages to the TTL lights is that if I trust the camera is going to do what I want it to do, then if my subject moves to or from the camera and the distance where that lighting is changing, it'll control the light and either increase it or decrease it to be able to automatically adjust for that, which is really nice. Another kind of side byproduct of the TTL lights, or at least the speed lights for Nikon and Canon, is that you can, thanks Eric, you can go beyond what's typically thought of as the maximum sync speed. So like for example, with Nikons it's typically I think a 2/50th of a second, and Canons it's a 200th of a second, depending on the model of the camera. And if you go beyond that, you'll see like a black bar will go across your picture. And what that basically is, the way these vertical plane shutter camera internals work is it drops like a door basically and exposes the sensor, and then it's followed by a second curtain that falls. And if your exposure is too quick, it will drop and the second one will begin to follow behind it before the first one clears and is actually fully exposing the sensor. So there's no actual point where the flash could fire off and you would completely expose that light into the sensor, and you get the area that's lit and then the area that's not lit, which is where you get the dark band. If you're using TTL lights with the Canon or Nikon at least, it could do this thing where it basically will pulse the lights at a lower power, but it'll pulse it continuously through the whole exposure. And because you can do that, it evenly lights out even through up to the highest shutter speed available. So if you can shoot up to an 8,000th of a second with your camera, you can use TTL light up to an 8,000th of a second, which basically gives you the ability to use wider apertures. You can shoot in bright daylight. You can basically overpower the sun because you're pumping in a bunch of light from your flash, which is maybe like 3 feet away from your subject. And because you're shooting at an 8,000th or a 4,000th of a second, the sky goes dark. And now all of a sudden your blown out sky has all this detail on the clouds and all this texture to it, which you might not otherwise be able to be able to see. Really quickly, just a couple of ways to kind of describe light. You have hard light, which is when I was mentioning the sun. On a clear day, the sun is what you would consider a hard light. Even though it's a very big light source, it's so far away, the apparent size is very small. So a good indicator of a hard light source is the shadows that it produces are very clean edge. They have a very hard edge to them. Whereas if you have like like today, overcast day, the sun is lighting up this big bank of clouds up in the sky. So the whole cloud, all the clouds above you are your light source basically. And because the light is coming from all around you, shadows almost disappear, and there's almost very little or no shadows, and that would be a very, very soft light source, and there's everything in between. So if something is very evenly lit, where there's no kind of fall off from one side to the other, or there's no kind of dramatic lighting look, that would be considered more of a flat light. Warm and cold light refers to the color temperature. So again, if you're looking at photos and you've seen people shooting like in the golden hour sunset, if you want to think of that time as the golden hour, the light appears to be more of like an amber or like a warmer color to it. And then after the sun goes onto the horizon and the light is still there, but it has like a bluer look to it because it's got a cooler color temperature look to it. So again, using these gels, you can kind of fake some of that stuff. If you're going to use a strobe to light, whether it be insects or plants or people, if you put it on amber gel, the light now has an amber color to it, so it has this warmer look to it, which kind of feels more like that sunset look. That reflector with the gold panel that I was talking about, that would reflect a warmer light tone that way. Whereas the cooler light, you could cool if you want to by putting on these blue gels the same way. And then just really quickly, direct and indirect light, pretty basic. Direct light is light that's right from the light source and hitting, whereas indirect light, which is basically what we have in here coming in through the windows, it's kind of bouncing off of things and filtering in, so it just has like different kind of a look to it. So I did mention that there's a place, time and a place for that little pop-up flash, and this is one of the only places where I would find it to be really useful, other than to control flashes. You can, on some cameras, you can use that pop-up flash to produce a light pulse that will control your speed light completely disconnected just by the light waves. If you're using, I know you could do it with Nikon, I'm not sure if you could do it with Canon or not. So in this case, out on the water, the background is the sky and the trees far away, and using that pop-up flash to kind of fill in a little bit, you're not going to see that harsh shadow cast on the wall behind it. And in this case, it makes that otherwise really backlit photo a little bit better exposed. So again, I think I mentioned a little bit about the trick of basically underexposing or exposing with a color gel, which is the bottom little tip there that I'm talking about, and then color balancing for the newly lit area, which throws off the color of the background. But here's a neat little trick you could do for lighting subjects if you want to get additional saturation in your sky and your background, is if you can set your camera, the EV or the exposure value, under by 1 or 2 stops, and then match that roughly with overexposing your flash. Whatever the flash actually hits and lights up will be about the right exposure, but everything else will be underexposed in this case. So if you're shooting against a blown out bright sky and you undershoot by 2 stops, the sky's going to have good color to it and good saturation, but your person's going to be really silhouetted and they're not going to be lit. So if you bring in the flash and you overexpose that, your person or your, whatever your subject would be, it's going to have a better light to that. So that's a nice little trick you can do, and I do have a couple examples of that. So I do the Wednesday night races on the out of Annapolis, and we were coming back one time, and we were just fooling around with TTL lighting, and this was actually wirelessly done using the one flash to trigger another flash, which is not really important here. But so this is the one guy who was with us. This is with just available light, and then just minutes later. So this isn't really much darker, but underexposing the background, you can see it was a pretty stormy day, and what looks just like kind of gray in the back, which actually behind him on the left photo, it looks white almost. But now you can see there's all this detail in the sky, and so that's where that flash is coming in. And you can see the angle of it, getting the flash off the camera and taking it off to the left side. You could see now there's also fall off, which gives a little bit of depth that way as well, a little bit more drama to the picture, a little bit more dramatic that way. And then the other guy who was with us, same kind of a thing. So this is where I was using, this is the photo I showed earlier where I was cropped in a little bit tighter. This was, my friend and I, a photographer, I'll talk more about trips in a little bit, but a friend and I who's a photographer, we typically go on a trip a year where we basically just go out and our sole purpose is just to shoot things, and we don't worry about anything else really for a couple of days. And so this is at Kodachrome State, I think Kodachrome Basin State Park, which is out southwest. I forget actually exactly where it is. But it was an overcast day, it was snowy, and there wasn't a whole lot of color in the background of this. So I brought in my flash on that cord I just showed you a minute ago, and I was kind of leaning and holding it and holding it out to try to get a little bit of an angle from it. And by lighting up this branch in the foreground and then having the distant snow in the background not being affected by this amber gel, when I balanced the color to correct for the amber gel, I had to cool it, bring it to a bluer value to balance it out. So the background, which was not lit, or which was not changed, is now appearing to be blue. So it kind of gives it like a cooler look. It also separates it a little bit more from the color standpoint. It's not white on a white background. Same thing with these, same concept, same day, same location. Just a couple of other photos where I was using that amber gel with a flash. And again, this is how you would actually do it. I don't think I actually had a gel on that day, but using the flash with this cord to get it off the camera a little bit. And it's a little tricky sometimes to do it one-handed. You kind of bring in your second hand to make your adjustments, and then one-handed to shoot it. But and talking about lighting, actually I should mention, you can get these cables, the Nikon cables, about $80 to $100 depending on which one you get. This one is the one that has a little infrared illuminator up on top, which you can see is a little red window, and that'll cast out the same infrared light that the flash normally would. And the camera looks at that light to determine the distance and focus and things like that. You can get it without that for around $80. But dealextreme.com is a website where I've seen them. I've actually bought one from there. It's scary how cheap their prices are. It's like $25, including shipping from China, for a Nikon compatible, and you can get them for Canon also. But another thing I got from there is these little lights, which they're supposed to be retrofitted into cars and things like dome lights and things like that. These are LEDs around a ring. It's set up for 12 volts, so you don't have to put special power to it or anything. If you're hooking it to your car, it would be good to go. But I basically made a ring light out of one. So I took, and I actually have one of these. I can show you what I did. So it's basically when you buy a spindle of CDs for the case that comes over the. This is the top of the case, and I cut out the center area, which just happened to be the right size for the largest of the ones that I found online there. And then I just wired it in with a switch and just a socket where I could plug in. In this case, I've got a 2.9 amp hour lead acid battery that's sealed, so it's not going to leak or anything, but it'll run for probably days before it runs out. But it gives me a little bit of flexibility that I can have it on my belt, or I can coil this up a little bit, or I can leave it someplace and move around. And so now I've got this fairly bright light. It's not as bright as a flash would be, but if I'm doing macro photography, now with my camera mounted in the center, I don't have the flash or the light making a shadow on any one side. As I come in, the shadow is all around, but it's also lit from all around. So it makes those shadows go away. And this is great with the macro lens. You can get in real close and you can see, I could basically get it almost all the way into my hand before the center area begins to get a shadow on it. So, so this light element costs like $7.14, including shipping from China, which is crazy to think that they can do that. And then otherwise, it was like a couple dollars for the switch, a couple dollars for the socket, and then the cable and things I already had. And the battery was about $15. So for relatively expensive combination of parts, you can make yourself a ring light. And I do have a photo where it's shown mounted on the camera. Yeah. Well, they do make similar ones that are quite a bit pricier, I'm assuming. But so then I just take some foam. You can see there's foam around the inside there, and that basically makes it fit snugly around the lens, so that way it doesn't shift or anything like that. And that's how it would look on the camera itself. And I mentioned before about the cameras being capable of shooting video a lot of times today. This is a great video light. This thing can shoot a completely dark room with the ISOs that you can shoot with these digital SLRs. You can shoot relatively grainless video in a completely dark room within a reasonable distance, within, let's say, 20 feet or so. It lights it up really nicely, and because it's all around the lens, there's no shadow side. It's all evenly lit. So it's a really nice kind of handy thing to have, both for macro photography and in the case of using it to shoot video as well.